Okay, so where we left off, right, we had just pulled the wings out on the edges of this. And so I want to show you another way to use one of the cutting tools to create additional geometry on an object so that you can do things like areas like, say, on this model, if we look at the nose cone in this image here, you can kind of make out in here that there's, right, it drops down. There's a little bit of a pit there. And then also with the, you know, we might make the cockpit stand out a little bit more as well. And so we're going to go ahead and start to do some of those things. And then once we do that, I'll show you how to start these engines. We're not going to detail them too much. We're just going to do, you know, some minor adjustments to them to make these happen. All right. So in this first thing, let's go ahead and go to our perspective view and get the nose cone in, right, basically in your whole frame. Now, I'm not going to place this exactly where it should be, but I'm going to try and get somewhat close. And so what I want to do is I can be in polygon mode, edges mode. It doesn't really matter, but I definitely want to have this object selected, right? I had deselected it before, so now it's selected, it's highlighted in blue. And this allows me to use these tools. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the letter K once, and that pops this up. Now, at this point, we've just been using the loop path cut tool. This time we're going to use what's called the line cut tool. So we're going to hit K one more time, right? And this is this knife icon here, right? This is the line cut tool. And so what we're going to do is we want to cut, and we're actually going to cut here and then cut out to here and then back across to this center line. And so what the line cut tool does is it allows you to just go in, and if I click once here and start dragging, I can create a straight line. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut to here. And once I've cut to there, I'm going to continue over. As long as I don't hit anything but the mouse button, right, I can continue over, and I think this is more or less straight. I'm going to go ahead and click one more time. And then I'm going to hit the escape key. And that will stop those cuts. And I'm going to rotate my view so that line's a little bit more visible. And you can see I wasn't, I didn't do a perfect job. So I'm just going to go ahead and go into points mode, use my live selection tool. I'm going to check mark only select visible elements. And I'm just going to nudge this point a little bit until it's a little bit straighter. It doesn't have to be perfect, but right, so it's just a little bit more accurate. And so once I've done that, what I'm going to do is now to create that cut in, I'm going to use the extrude tool. So I'm going to go to polygons mode. I'm going to use my live selection tool to select these two polygons that I've created. And you know, because there's a little bit of an angle between them, what I may, once I extrude this a bit, I'll probably try and flatten that edge out too. And so, but before I do that, let's go ahead and use the extrude tool. So we're going to hit the letter D on the keyboard. And what we want to do is we want to extrude in a little bit. So, right, this is extruding out. And so if there was a feature where, right, maybe there's like a little panel that pops out of the side of this, pulling out would be what I'd want to do. But in this case, I'm going to pull it in a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and come over here. And one of the things that I'm going to want to do is then rotate this, right? Because this front edge really should come straight up to here. So I'm going to hit the letter R on the keyboard, and I'm just going to rotate this until, right, it's more or less even. I'm going to let it be just a little bit low, you know, and this is something where it's close enough. I don't think there's going to be any issues. If I wanted to, I could drop it down using the move tool just a hair to create like a tiny lip there, but I still get that same cut in that was expected. So now what I need to do is I need to flatten that geometry out. And so if I come over here and click on this iron tool and check mark preserve boundaries, I believe is what I want. I should be able to not do what I want to do. So if I have these two polygons selected, what I really want to do now is I just want to go ahead and grab this edge and pull it down a little bit so it's close to flat, right? And again, this doesn't need to be super precise. You know, it just doesn't have that little angle in there. It should just be straight. So I'm just going to pull that down a few units so that it looks a little bit more flat as it goes back into the body of this thing. Okay, so that's how I can do that part. So let's go ahead and add one more little detail. You know, there's a bunch of stuff if you look at some of the images, right? Even here, there's all of these things that you could pop up, pop down. There's a lot of detail that could be added to those wings with some geometry tweaks. So the other thing is that this, that we need to make a few changes to the geometry here. And so I'm going to go ahead and use that same cut tool, right? So the knife tool. So I can go down and click on the knife down there, or I can hit the letter K once and then a second time. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and zoom in until we can hover over this line. I'm going to click here, and I'm just going to bring and create another piece of geometry here. And then I'm going to sneak back to this other one here. If you one of the nice things with Cinema4D is even while you have a tool open, if you hold down the number 1, 2, or 3 and click and drag and then release it, it won't set this cut. It'll actually allow me to move the view and then set the cut. So I'm going to go ahead and set the cut there as well. All right, so I've got these edges here. So now what I can do is if I want to create a little bit more geometry, I can go into points mode. I can make sure I use my live selection tool, right? Hit the space bar to get live selection. Only select visible elements is on. And I can just rotate this view a bit so I can see better, right? I could pull this in a little bit and just pull this down. So I get a little bit, right, of an edge, and maybe I need to pull it out a touch, but right, so I have a little bit of an edge there between the two, and the same thing can happen here, right? I can go ahead and pull this in a little bit more, and maybe up just a hair, right? But this allows me to kind of mirror the way that the nose cone is going. You can kind of see where that point is. Now it's aligning about where it should be, right? So now I've got a much cleaner looking difference in that geometry. And when I go around the back here, you know, this point here can probably be pulled out a little bit now, right? So I get a little bit less of these going in, and I might actually pull both of these out a touch to make the geometry a little bit less, because it seemed just like a little bit off in there. And there may be other issues, right? I could go through and just continue to tweak this to make it look a little bit better, right? So these are some of the ways that we can make these minor adjustments. And something else, right? There's these edges on the windscreen where I actually have little areas that are raised. And so there's a couple of ways that I could go about working with that, but using that cut tool is really a pretty effective way to do it. So what I can do is I can hover over this edge, and I'm going to zoom way in because this doesn't need to be that thick. I can start a point here, and what I can do is I can come over, and I don't even need to go to the edge, right? As this thing twitches on me. Let me zoom in a couple more steps so I have a bit more freedom as to where, and I'm trying to just keep it reasonably parallel. And then I'm going to zoom out a touch. I'm going to press 1, click and drag so I can get down to where I need to be down here at the bottom of the windscreen. Zoom in some. Don't know where this... I don't know what is going on exactly here. Oops. Right. It's a little fussy the way it's set up, and there might be some setting where where I'm actually just making a mistake here. Okay, so you saw how I kind of did those cuts, and obviously these points aren't where I want them to be, so I'm going to use the space bar. I'm going to make sure it says only check visible elements. I'm going to grab this point, and I believe if I do, and then I'm going to go ahead and just pull this out to the edge and pull this down so that this is a little bit thinner. And I'm going to deselect that. I'm going to grab this one, and I might actually use slide in this case. So I'm going to use the slide. Oops, that's not the slide tool. I'm going to use the slide tool. I'm going to pull this down a touch, so that's more square. And I might be able to use the slide tool here. Let's see what happens. No, it wants it to either go on that point or that point, so I'm going to have to actually select it and use the move tool. And I might want to switch. No, that doesn't seem to matter. I don't know, and I can't slide it along the surface, but which means it's going to press in a little bit potentially. So I might need to pull it up a touch, which we're going to be manipulating this thing pretty significantly, so it doesn't really matter, right? And so I'm just going to do this one edge, just so you can see another way that the extrude tool that we can use the extrude tool. So I'm also going to do, I am going to cut this side too, so that we can, when we do the extrude, we'll select both of them and extrude them as a group. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and deselect everything. I'm going to hit K twice, and I'm just going to start clicking to create some points here. Go and I've got that cut there now. I don't know why it never lets me hover over that. I'm going to zoom way in because I want to have a point here. I'm going to pull out. Apparently I have to be... This is a little frustrating. I don't know why it's... Every time I zoom in or out, it seems to undo that. Let's see. So I'm just going to go until that snapping stops. I'm going to come around and cut the other side. Okay, now that I've done that, I'm going to be in points mode. I'm going to hit select, or live selection, and now I'm going to have to just manually pull these forward, which is a little bit annoying. And you can see that, right, it's pulling it out of that plane. But again, it doesn't really matter. As long as I start to get these, as long as I move them back into plane. And you can kind of tell when it's about right because the geometry snaps back to a harder corner. You can see that now I'm not in the right plane, so I'm going to pop this back out until that looks more right. Okay, so I've created these two panels on here, and now what I'm going to do is I could either select the outside and make it larger, or I could select the inside, where the glass is, and make it a little bit less deep. So I'm going to go to polygons mode. I'm going to select this polygon. I'm going to hit the letter D, and I'm going to click and drag. And I'm just going to drag this down just a hair, right? And then I will select this polygon. Oops. I'm going to undo that last step. I will use the selection tool to select this polygon, hit the letter D to extrude, and then I'm just going to extrude in a hair, right? And so now I've added, you know, a significant, oops, sorry, I forgot that that's not the tool that I want. Okay, so now I've created a significant amount of detail here, right, where suddenly this cockpit looks much more like a cockpit because those windows are inset. And so I could go ahead and continue, and you know, I believe there's 2 windows back here somewhere, and there's 2 windows here, and so I could go ahead and, you know, do that same action around those other windows. But this is enough detail for now to give you some sense of how to go in and continue to add more detail to your models. So let's look at how we would do these engines. So to start with, we're going to zoom out a bit, and we're just going to create a cylinder, and we're going to look at how we can assemble a cylinder with like 2 symmetry objects to create all 4 engines, but only have one that we're modeling at a time. And so I'm going to go ahead and create a cylinder. And that cylinder is vertical right now, so what I need to do is I need to go to the Object tab on the cylinder. I need to change the orientation from Y plus to, right, the blue axis is Z, so I want it to be Z plus so it is aiming in the right direction. And then right now it's much too large, so I'm going to set the radius to 30. And we can't see it, but that's fine. We're going to adjust it here in a little bit. So then I'm going to go ahead and turn off the X-wing. So something we haven't talked about yet is how to turn off objects that don't have a check mark next to them, right? So I've turned the symmetry off, but to make this cube invisible in the viewport, and it's not a cube anymore, it's the X-wing, is there's these 2 little dots, right? These 2 little dots here. This one is for if it's visible to be rendered or not, and this one's if it's visible to be seen in the viewport or not before we render the image. And so if I click on this once, that means no matter what the settings on this object are, it should be visible. And if I click on it again and I get the red, that means it should be invisible. And so now it's disappeared. And this is going to allow me to see these engines without dealing with without it being obscured by the X-wing right now. All right, so let's go ahead and create another symmetry object. And so we go under subdivision surface to symmetry. I'm going to make the cylinder a child of the symmetry, and currently nothing happens, but you can see that it's sort of like got this weird highlighting in its selection thing going on. And that's because there are 2 cylinders directly on top of each other right now, because this cylinder is at the center of the world. So if I select the cylinder and I move it to the left or to the right, in this case I'm moving it to the right because I know that's probably the side I'm going to be working on it from. So now I can set the distance between these 2 cylinders. And I'm going to be using the top view and the side view to basically set where these cylinders should be in terms of the XY position, right? So or at least on the X-axis, right? So currently they're about right. I'll make a couple minor changes here in a little bit. But before I do that, I need to create another symmetry. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a symmetry, and this symmetry will be a child of that symmetry. So then we have essentially 4 cylinders instead of 2 cylinders. So I'm going to go ahead and go up to subdivision surface again and find the symmetry. And then I'm just going to take this symmetry.1. I'm going to drag it in and make it a child of symmetry 2. Now again, it still looks like I only have 2 objects. And so one of the things is, right, by default, the symmetry, the mirror plane is ZY. And so it's just mirroring these back on top of each other again right now. What we need to do is we need to change that. And I'm going to change it to XZ to start with, because honestly, I don't know which one it needs to be. And then what I'm going to do is, in order to figure out where they all go, I'm not going to move the cylinder because I'm already happy with where it is in reference to Symmetry 1. But what I am going to do is move Symmetry 1 now. And I'm going to lift Symmetry 1 up. If I've done this right, they will split apart into two sets. Hey, look at that. Right? And so now I've got these set. Yeah, but you can see they're not quite where they should be in terms of being set on the wings of the X-Wing. They're about the right distance, but they're just offset in height. And so in this case, now I need to go up to Symmetry 2, and I need to adjust the position of that final symmetry to align all four. And so if I get that somewhat centered, I can go back to Symmetry 1 and nudge this down a little bit more. And then I can go back to my cylinder, and I can actually pull the cylinder in a touch. And I could probably also, if I pulled the cylinder down, there we go, I can do those final adjustments by modifying the cylinder position. Okay, so let's go ahead, and now we just need to align all of this with where the engines actually are on the wings. So I'm going to press the one down, I'm going to reframe this so that I can see where the engine should be. I'm going to click on Symmetry 2, and I'm just going to drag the whole thing back until they're aligned. And now the default size for the cylinder made it pretty close to the size of these engines. But what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and extend that a bit. And I know that both ends are going to grow when I do this. So I'm going to come here, I'm going to click on this one cylinder, and I'm just going to scale the height up until, I did a pretty good job centering that, until it's just about right. And then if I have to move things forward or backward, I'll grab Symmetry 2 and just, you know, more or less center it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so I could now turn on my X-Wing visibility again just to make sure that these are just about where I want them to be. And it looks pretty good. They stick through the wing some, which I believe actually happens in the model as well. And if not, we can always like do a little bit more fine tuning. Now, the engines on the X-Wings are, right, a little bit different, right? The front half of this cylinder should be the full diameter, and the back half is smaller, and it pops up a little bit from the other, right, from the other object. And so what we're going to do is we're going to need to make the cylinder editable, and then we can start modifying that geometry. And there's something that with any object that has round caps on it on the ends, there's something that happens when you make it editable that you need to be aware of, and that can be really, really frustrating. So I'm going to go ahead and select this cylinder. And then what I want to do is I want to use the, I've got it selected. I'm in Polygon mode now, but right now it is not editable. So I can either go up, and if you remember, I can click on Make Editable. I can hit the letter C. I can go to Object, Make Editable. Right, there's several ways. I can right-click on it and say Make Editable. But in this case, I'm just going to hit the letter C. And when I do that, you'll notice that this is actually the, the engine that I need to use. So I'm going to rotate my view so I can see it better. And then what I want to do is I want to select these. This back half is what needs to be narrower. And so what I want to do is select all of, use the ring selection tool to select those polygons. So I'm going to go down to ring selection. I'm going to hover over this. I am in polygon mode, just to make sure you do that too. I'm going to select one, hold down Shift, select the other. And I'm intentionally not selecting the end right now because I want to show you what happens when you, what happens when you make something editable that has round caps. And so I'm going to go ahead and let's say I want to scale these down in the X and Y direction. And what that's going to do is actually going to taper this, and we don't really want to do that, but we'll give it a go. So actually, it's going to be better if we just select this back one. So let's just select this one, which will taper this one, and then we'll just extend this out a little bit so we can lift the whole thing up later. But if I go ahead and try and scale this by hitting the letter T, and I rotate my view, so, don't rotate the engine. Hit the wrong key. I rotate my view so I can scale in both the red and green axis, the Y and X axis together. And so I'm going to go ahead and scale this. And it's actually working the way it's supposed to. Huh. Maybe they made a change in S22 that makes this like do this activity by default. Let's go ahead and see. So I'm going to go ahead and use the ring selection tool again. So I'm going to hit the space bar, and since that's the last thing I had, I should be able to select that. I'm going to hit the letter E on the keyboard, and I'm going to pull this out. Oh my goodness, they changed it. So in every version up until this version, whenever you made a cylinder editable, so if you're using another version of Cinema4D and you make something editable, this cap here will is separate. It's a separate piece, and it's not actually joined to the rest of the object. And that can really throw you off, because unless you are specifically told that's the case. So never mind all of that stuff that I got excited to tell you, because Cinema4D finally resolved it, or Maxon did. Okay, so what we need to do is really we want this whole section here needs to be lifted up some, and it actually needs to be made longer. We do want some taper there so that there is that joint between the two pieces. But we want this taper, we want that to be pretty small. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my ring selection tool. Sorry, my loop selection tool. I'm going to go to edges mode, and I'm going to hover over until I can select that loop. I'm going to hit the letter E, and I'm just going to, first thing I'm going to do is going to drag it pretty close to the body of that engine, right? So that gives me a nice taper there. And then what I need to do is go to polygons mode, and I want to, I can probably use the ring selection, and oops, I don't know what button I keep hitting on accident, but I keep hitting it. So I've got this selected. I'm just going to hold down Shift, select this, all of these parts, hit the letter E, and then I'm just going to pull it up. And these engines, I'm going to rotate around. Right, they stick up just a little bit, and granted, we could probably do a better job modeling this, but really this is just to get things going. Right, that does look a little silly. I'm sure that's not what they actually look like. I'm going to bring these down just a touch, and I could bring this out a little bit more so there's a little bit less angle, but we're going to pretend that that is the magical sauce that we need. Okay. So that's like the general gist of creating these additional elements. Now, eventually, you know, and ideally these would all become joined as one model. But we're not going to take that step right now just because of the amount of time it takes. We're going to look at how to do that with some other simpler examples. The other thing you can do at this point, obviously, is add the blasters. And these are the things I would like you to do to continue doing, because the tutorial's at an end. But I would like you to continue to add some more detail to this, right? Add, like, model these and add them to the wings. You can plop a little sphere in there for for R2-D2. And go ahead and experiment with adding a little bit more detail. Maybe look at some more reference images to see where things pop out or are inset. And hopefully experimenting with those things will lead you to some other questions and challenges that we can talk about in class. All right, but we have a basic X-Wing model created now. All right, so go ahead and save this, and I'll see you in class.